I'm not a man who panics easily. I've always prided myself on keeping a level head when other fathers might have lost theirs, and until recently I thought that steadiness was a gift, until I watched our 6-year-old daughter, Zoe, gingerly haul herself across the living room floor on tiptoe, one tiny foot dragging behind her as if it no longer belonged to her body. In that moment, I felt the first crack in my composure. We were in our modest 2-bedroom apartment on a quiet street of aging elm trees, the kind of place where neighbors wave from their porches and say good morning even before coffee. Zoe had been dreaming up games all afternoon, racing imaginary unicorns through the hallway, so I assumed her limp was just another heroic battle scar. That is, until she sidestepped a stray Lego block, winced, and hurried away without a backward glance. "Sweetie, did you hurt your leg?" I asked, crouching beside her. She raised big brown eyes, glistening with a pain I'd never seen before. "It's nothing," she whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice underfoot. "Just a bump." I wanted to believe her, to chalk it up to scraped knees and scraped elbows like the rest of her endless childhood tumbles. Harper, my wife and Zoe's mother, a soft-spoken elementary school art teacher with a comforting smile, quickly backed me up. She brushed a lock of hair behind Zoe's ear and ruffled her curls. "She's just tired," Harper said gently. "End of school year, extra homework, and too many days at the playground. She needs rest." It was an easy explanation. It was logical. Our lives had felt like they were on fast-forward lately. End-of-year class parties, PTA meetings, cleaning out lockers, packing lunches with more caution than usual as exams approached. I nodded, reassured, and went back to unpacking a grocery bag. But that night, when the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the wind drifting through a cracked window, Zoe's muffled cries jolted us awake. I stumbled down the hall, adrenaline replacing my earlier calm. There she was, curled up in her twin bed, sheets tangled around her legs, clutching her left knee with both fists. Her tears were small, but they gutted me. "Daddy," she sobbed, her voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. "It hurts." I scooped her into my arms, careful not to touch the swollen spot above her shin, and carried her to the couch. As I ran a cool cloth over her skin, I noticed how pale she looked, how even breathing seemed to cost her effort. Next to me, Harper sat, pale as a ghost, her fingers white-knuckled on her knees. I recognized that look in her eyes, the first flicker of parental fear. We spent the next morning in a blur of activity. I called the pediatrician, my voice unsteady. "She needs to be seen today," I insisted, though my coach-like instincts screamed at me to keep everything under control. Harper hurried our clothes into the laundry basket while I strapped Zoe into her car seat, quiet and tense. I drove through the streets at a crawl, as if by going slower I could stall whatever waited at the doctor's office. I thought of dozens of innocuous reasons for her pain. Maybe a tiny stress fracture, vitamin deficiency, maybe just overuse. I tried to anchor my fear with hope. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. Children squirmed on their parents' laps, staring at cartoon posters, oblivious to the grown-ups' worry. When the nurse called our name, Zoe clung to my hand like a frightened kitten reaching for home. The doctor's examination was clinical but kind. He pressed along her thigh, asked her to point and to walk in a straight line, and recommended x-rays just to be safe. In the radiology room, Zoe pressed her face against the plexiglass window, her eyes filling with tears as she watched the technician position her leg. Harper and I shared a glance that felt heavier than water. Neither of us spoke, but our hands knotted together as tightly as our thoughts. Then the words came. The oncologist, a tall man whose eyes were kind but who carried sorrow like a second skin, removed his glasses, folded his hands, and said, "There's a tumor in her femur. We need to operate. Fast." Time stopped. Zoe's small body trembled in my arms. I tasted metal in my mouth, as if the air itself had turned bitter. I stared at that doctor through a fog of disbelief. My mind raced back through everything. Her princess socks, her drawings of suns with uneven rays, the way she danced when no one was watching, and wondered how something so beautiful could be threatened by something so cruel. Harper sank into her chair, her face white as the hospital walls. "It's going to be expensive," the doctor continued, his voice gentle but firm. "But the sooner we do it, the better her chance of walking without pain." He explained the procedure, resection of the tumor, followed by reconstruction or prosthetic placement, and spoke of statistics and survival rates with a clinical detachment I envied. My wife's lips trembled. She looked at me, voice barely audible. "What are we going to do, Marcus?" I swallowed hard, then felt something settle in my chest. A determination fierce and unwavering. "Whatever it takes," I said, and offered her a shaky smile, one that I hoped would convince us both that we could be brave. As we left the hospital, the late afternoon sun casting elongated shadows across the parking lot, Zoe limped into the center console and whispered, "Can we skip the park today, Dad?" My legs hurt. Everything inside me broke and reformed in an instant. I knew, in that tender plea, that this wasn't something we could brush off. We were no longer merely tired or overworked. We were a family facing a battle we never anticipated, and the world we took for granted had shifted beneath our feet. Yet I held Zoe's small hand, felt her trust pulsing against my palm, and promised myself we would find a way through. We had to. There's a peculiar limbo that follows the word cancer, especially when it's applied to someone barely out of toddlerhood. After our pediatrician's referral, Harper and I sat in the waiting room of the oncology wing, clutching Zoe's tiny hand between us like a lifeline. Her princess socks peeked out from under the sterile paper gown, and the flimsy fabric did nothing to shield her from the chill of the linoleum floors. I cleared my throat more times than I dared to cough, each swallowed breath magnifying the pounding in my temples. Outside the sliding glass doors, families milled about, some staring at screens, others whispering to each other with forced calm. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee, practical, utilitarian, devoid of warmth. When the oncologist finally appeared, he moved with deliberate slowness, as though easing himself through the gravity of the room. He wore a crisp white coat and a tie patterned with tiny blue ribbons. His eyes were soft, but the crease between his brows carried the weight of all those who had come before us. He introduced himself, Dr. Linwood, but to me his name blended into the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. He examined Zoe's chart one-handed, then looked up at us and offered a small, professional smile. My mind had been preparing for bad news, terrible news, but it still convulsed when I heard the words. "There's a tumor in her femur, Dr. Linwood began, his tone gentle but unyielding. "And from the imaging, it appears to be malignant. We'll need to operate quickly to remove it and reconstruct the bone." The word malignant tugged at my chest like a hook. I felt my front teeth clench together, the silence stretching too wide between his syllables. Zoe's head turned toward him. She was still young enough to trust every adult unconditionally, and in her gaze I saw the flicker of hope. Hope that adults knew what to do, that pain could be fixed by someone with better schooling than I ever had. She gave him a small, sympathetic smile. "Warrior princess," I thought, and fought back tears. Dr. Linwood continued, explaining in clinical terms the biopsy, the surgery, and the follow-up chemotherapy sessions. I heard him mention survival rates and resection margins, phrases once so abstract that I'd never given them a second thought. Now they were etched into my brain, instructions in an alien tongue. Harper squeezed my shoulder, her knuckles white, as the doctor detailed the need for a temporary external fixator to stabilize the bone, and then a permanent internal rod once the tumor was excised. He said, "It's going to be expensive. The hospital estimate, before insurance, is in excess of $20,000. I felt it before I heard it, the crushing weight of necessity. $20,000 seemed both obscene and inadequate, like trying to buy the ocean by the cup. Harper's breath hitched. She looked at me, eyes wide, tears pooling at the corners. "We'll find a way," I whispered, though neither of us knew exactly how. My job as a maintenance supervisor paid well enough to keep the lights on and our modest debts current, but there was no padding, no nest egg for emergencies of this scale. I thought of our rent, our utility bills, the groceries I'd picked up that morning, milk, cereal, peanut butter, and realized every cent we had would vanish in an instant. I pictured us scrimping for months just to cover this one operation. But what choice did we have? Harper's nod was barely perceptible, but in it I recognized the same stubborn resolve I carried in my own bones. We would not let our daughter's life be dictated by our bank balance. The oncologist closed his folder and folded his hands. "We can schedule the operation in 5 days, assuming we can get authorization and payment processed. Afterward, she'll need at least a week in the pediatric ICU, followed by inpatient rehabilitation." He paused, meeting my eyes directly. The sooner we address this, the better her long-term mobility outcomes will be. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat solidifying into determination. Thank you, doctor, I said. My voice sounded foreign even to my own ears. Walking back through the empty hallways, the three of us held hands as though crossing some invisible finish line. Zoe clung to us on either side, her legs feeling heavier by the minute. I steered her toward the elevators, but she stopped as a janitor pushed a cart past us, humming tunelessly. "Are you okay, sweetie?" I asked. She nodded but avoided my gaze. I wondered what thoughts flickered through her 6-year-old mind. Had she begun to internalize that life could shift on a dime, that the simple pleasure of a run across the grass might be off-limits for a while? At home, we sat around the kitchen table, the same one we'd eaten pancakes and cereal at every morning before school. The envelope labeled Zoe in thick black marker lay between us, a talisman and a threat. Harper reached for it, fingertips brushing the white paper. "We'll use every dollar we have," she said. "Then, maybe more." She looked at me with tears brimming, and I knew she was contemplating things neither of us wanted to: friends, family, crowdfunding, even loans. The silence that settled afterward was not peaceful. It vibrated with unspoken fears. Yet beneath it all, I felt the steady thrum of resolve, the promise that, even if the world refused to cooperate, we would stand as a united front for our child. That evening, after I gave Zoe a warm bath, I tucked her into bed. She wiggled under the soft blankets, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. "Daddy," she whispered, "will I walk again?" I kissed the side of her forehead, inhaling the comforting scent of shampoo and sleep. "Yes," I said, and meant it with everything in me. "I promise you'll walk again." Her eyes fluttered shut, trust settling in her features even as exhaustion pulled her down. As I quietly closed the door behind me, I leaned against the wood, feeling its cool firmness beneath my palm. In that moment, my heart felt both heavy and resolute. We had the diagnosis. We had a plan. We had to find the money. And above all, we had to stay strong because for Zoe, there was no other option. We didn't have the money. That truth sat in the center of our living room like an immovable boulder, reminding us every second that love alone wouldn't pay for Zoe's life-saving surgery. My role as a maintenance supervisor covered our rent, utilities, and groceries, but left little room for emergencies. Harper's part-time work at the florist barely supplemented the income my paycheck provided. Until now, we'd managed our modest household with careful budgeting, stretching every naira until it ached like overused sinew. But this crisis was different. Stacking bills and late notices in a corner wouldn't fix a tumor eating away at our daughter's femur. So, we did what any desperate parents might do. We began saving with military precision. That evening, Harper and I sat at the kitchen table, the soft glow of the single overhead bulb illuminating empty mugs of tea and an open laptop displaying hospital estimates. I watched her pale fingers dance across the keyboard, calculating projected costs for the biopsy, surgical procedures, anesthesia, hospital stay, and rehabilitation. Each line item was a heart stab, a reminder that time was short and the numbers were rising. When she closed the laptop, her eyes were glassy. "We need a plan," she whispered. I nodded, pounding heart echoing in my ears. Our plan began with something both radical and painfully simple. We opened a plain white envelope and, together, scrawled Zoe in thick, bold letters. It was our talisman, our rallying point. A container that would hold the sum we needed and the hopes we refused to let slip away. From that moment, every naira we saved was sacred. I skipped lunches, no more roadside suya or jollof rice from the canteen, bringing peanut butter sandwiches and bottled water instead. I cut back on fuel by carpooling with colleagues and waking before dawn to catch the bus. Even then, my journey home at night was longer and colder, but I carried a thermos of dilute coffee and the image of Zoe's smile to warm me. Meanwhile, Harper canceled every non-essential expense: streaming subscriptions, magazine deliveries, and grocery indulgences like chocolate bars and fresh fruit beyond the bare minimum. Each time she erased a recurring payment from our online banking, she seemed to shrink a little under the weight of what we were giving up. We also looked beyond our own pockets. Harper, resourceful and determined, suggested asking for help discreetly from co-workers at the flower shop. An anonymous fundraiser, maybe a few small donations dropped into the envelope during break time. I felt conflicted, torn between pride and necessity. The thought of relying on others for our daughter's fate felt like asking strangers to fortify the foundations of our home. But when I saw the way Harper's shoulders relaxed just a fraction at the prospect, I swallowed my pride. She confided in me later that day that she'd seen similar envelopes passed around before for colleagues in trouble and witnessed how a community could come together like a patchwork quilt against a storm. I agreed that if it would speed Zoe's surgery, I would set aside my pride. To accelerate our savings, I took on side jobs. Every evening after my full shift, I answered calls for quick repairs, leaky faucets, broken door locks, faulty wiring, often working until late into the night. My hands were calloused, spots of rust and grease ingrained beneath my nails. My bones ached from the constant lifting and bending, but I imagined that pain as a transaction, my sweat exchanged for my daughter's future mobility. I refused to track my earnings too closely, fearing that each naira I counted might also count the seconds she spent in pain. Harper, too, found ways to chip in. She arranged freelance floral arrangements for weekend weddings, bouquets of roses and lilies that she crafted with trembling fingers. She babysat for neighbors whenever she could, trading playtime with other children for 500 naira here, 1,000 there. The envelope swelled. It became a testament to our sacrifice and solidarity. On Sundays, we laid it on the coffee table, brushing dust and stray petals off its surface, and whispered to each other the latest total. 10,000 naira, we'd say. 12,000. Each increment felt like a promise, like a step taken together on a narrow ledge above a vast canyon of uncertainty. Zoe would peek at it from time to time, tracing the thick letters with her small finger, asking, "Are we there yet, Daddy?" I nodded, embracing her small form. Almost, princess, I would say, though I didn't know exactly how close we truly were. At nights, when the apartment was silent and our bodies begged for sleep, I lay awake listening to Harper's soft breathing beside me. I worried that I had placed too much burden on her already tired shoulders. When I asked if she needed to rest, she'd murmur, "Not yet. Not until we have it." Her resolve was as bright and brittle as glass. I felt my own resolve hardening around my heart, unbreakable, unrelenting. I knew there was one way to seal our commitment and banish any lingering doubt. So, on the fifth night, I took the envelope and, without a word, placed it in my coat pocket. The next morning, I presented the envelope to Harper at the kitchen table as though presenting a newborn child. Its edges were frayed and smudged, the paper crinkled from so many midnights and hands diving in to count and recount. 21,000 naira, I said, voice thick. Her eyes, red-rimmed and shining, filled with tears. She opened the flap and peered inside, then looked up at me as though seeing me anew. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. The silence between us spoke volumes of relief and awe. We had done it. We'd gathered enough to pay for the surgery's down payment, the anesthesia, the surgeon's fees. I felt a swell of pride and heartbreak in the same breath. We had sacrificed comfort, rest, and so much else, yet our future still seemed precarious. I believed, in that moment, that the worst was behind us. The surgery was scheduled in 5 days. All that remained was to transfer the money. I planned to ride the bus to the bank the next morning before work, fill out the forms, watch the teller's screen flicker as the funds moved electronically into the hospital's account. I envisioned Harper and me holding hands in the waiting area, our daughter safe under the bright lights of the operating theater. I clung to that vision like a lodestar, but deep inside, I wondered if promises and prayers would be enough. We had the envelope. We had the funds. But as the old saying went, money could burn through faster than paper in a fire. And if this was just the first spark, what lay ahead could still reduce us to ashes. Days blurred into nights as our lives narrowed to a singular focus, gathering every possible naira to save our daughter's future. The world outside our apartment transformed into a distant echo. Neither the hum of traffic nor the chatter of neighbors registered anymore. Each morning, I rose before dawn, slipping quietly out the door so as not to wake Harper and Zoe. My uniform, oil-stained overalls and scuffed work boots, gave way to jeans and a faded t-shirt by mid-morning, when I traded our apartment's conservator role for on-call repairs on strangers' homes. I learned to take apart clogged sinks with one hand while texting Harper updates with the other, negotiating fluorescent tubes and rewiring switches during stolen moments between scheduled rounds. My evenings dissolved into a montage of dripping faucets and squeaking floorboards. I met new faces who paid in cash and offered polite thanks before I melted back into the darkness. By the time I unlocked our front door, the city lights had dimmed, and the only warmth left in the world was inside our walls. Harper, meanwhile, embodied resilience I didn't know she possessed. Mornings found her at the florist's shop, her hands staining tiny stems with pollen as she arranged delicate bouquets of chrysanthemums and lilies. Soon after closing, she picked up her laptop and dove into freelance orders, hand-lettered wedding invitations, calligraphy for restaurant menus, delicate watercolor sketches for greeting cards. At odd hours, she screened her circle of stay-at-home moms, offering babysitting services so she could earn extra naira under the soft glow of our kitchen light. When she sat down beside me, her eyelids heavy with fatigue, she would smile that small, brave smile I fell in love with, and murmur, one foot in front of the other, right? Then she'd bend to inspect the envelope, tracing the thick black letters spelling our daughter's name, and I could tell she drew strength from that simple piece of paper. We didn't speak of how weary we were. Physical exhaustion took a backseat to the ache in our hearts each time Zoe's limp reasserted itself or she shuffled through the apartment, wincing at every step. Instead, we measured progress by the envelope's heft. Once, I watched as Harper slipped away from her desk at midnight to pull it out and hold it against her chest, her shoulders rising and falling with silent sobs. I hovered nearby, unsure whether to interrupt, until she looked up and waved me in. We sat cross-legged on the living room floor and counted the money together under the yellow glow of a single lamp. 15,000 naira, she breathed, exhaling relief. Zoe, woken by the lamp's light, wandered into the room in her pajamas, clutching a threadbare blanket. She pressed herself between us and asked, "Are we there yet?" I stroked her hair and said, "Nearly, princess. Nearly." She yawned, then toddled back to her bed, confidence blooming in her hazel eyes. There were moments when I caught Harper's gaze settling on me, silent question lingering there. Could I really continue? I tried to reassure her with a quick squeeze of her hand or a whispered, "We've got this." But inside I trembled. The weight of responsibility pressed so heavily on my shoulders that my bones seemed to compress under its force. I felt a dull ache in my back, a throbbing in my temples, and a hollow ache where sleep should have been. Yet the thought of Zoe's bright laughter filling our home again kept me upright, kept me forging ahead even when my body begged for rest. I reminded myself that every naira was a step toward her recovery, every drop of sweat an investment in her ability to dance across puddles without fear. The weeks wore on. Each weekend, I negotiated higher-paying side gigs. Repairing the rusted gate of the old woman down the road, repainting the doors of a small shop that sold second-hand clothes, installing shelves in a newly opened bookstore. At first, my extra income trickled in slowly, but gradually I learned to price my services appropriately, haggling with customers so they heard the value in my voice. I counted the earnings on my phone's notes app, then walked home to safeguard the cash in the envelope. I began slipping keys into the lapels of my coat, then slipping them into the envelope's fold before anyone noticed. Shame tried to creep in. How humiliating to hoard money in a tattered paper pouch when I had fingernails crusted with grease and my uniform perpetually stained. But the sight of Zoe's small face, hope and pain mingling in her gaze, steeled me against self-pity. One afternoon, as I returned from a 4-hour repair job at a hotel, I found Harper standing at the window, backlit by the pale light of the setting sun. In her hands, she held 2 envelopes, one thick and bulging, the other thin and nearly empty. When I stepped inside, she turned and smiled, tears pooling in her eyes. "I sold your old guitar," she said quietly, nodding toward the slim envelope. My stomach lurched. I'd nearly forgotten that instrument, a gift from my father when I first started playing. But I knew it had covered 3,000 naira in repairs, money that now bulged the Zoe envelope. Then she placed the second envelope on the table. Contributions from strangers in the florist's break room. Small bills scrawled with anonymous words of encouragement. "People care," she whispered, voice thick. "You'd be surprised." That night, we took stock. Under the soft lamplight, tallying contributions felt like charting a course across stormy seas. We calculated totals and estimated hospital fees, each new figure both comforting and terrifying in its size. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the count hit 21,000 naira. I closed my eyes, letting the reality sink in. We had enough. I reached for the envelope and ran my thumb over its surface until the paper felt warm. My heart swelled with pride and grief in equal measure. Pride in what we'd accomplished, grief at the price we'd paid in sleepless nights and aches that wouldn't dissipate. I stood and crossed the room to where Zoe slept, unaware that the world she knew had shifted so drastically. I gazed at her as she breathed in rhythm with the soft hum of the ceiling fan. Her hair, mussed from sleep, framed her face like a halo. She stirred, turned, and murmured something sweet in her dreams. I pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead and whispered, "Daddy's got the money, baby. You're going to be all right." In that moment, the envelope in my coat pocket grew heavier, laden not merely with Naira but with sacrifice, determination, and the unbreakable bond of a family refusing to surrender. Tomorrow, I would ride the bus at dawn, navigate bank paperwork, and ensure the hospital received our payment. But tonight, as I stood in the dim glow of her nightlight, I allowed myself to believe, for the first time, that we had done what we set out to do. We had summoned every resource, endured every hardship, and collected enough hope inside a simple paper envelope to carry us through the storm. And with that hope in hand, we could face whatever came next. The call came on the third morning after we believed the worst was behind us. I was at the kitchen table, the envelope labeled Zoe folded neatly beside my coffee cup, when my phone rang. The hospital's number blinked on the screen. My heart skittered into overdrive as I answered, voice steady on the outside even though I felt like I'd swallowed a stone. "Mr. Ellison?" the admissions clerk asked, her tone polite but clipped. "I'm calling to follow up on payment for your daughter's surgery scheduled for tomorrow morning." I stood up so suddenly that my chair scraped the tile floor. "Yes, of course," I said. "I arranged the transfer yesterday evening." Her voice hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir, but we've not received the funds. Without payment by 6 p.m. today, we'll have to release the operating slot." I sank back onto the chair, the world tilting beneath me. "There must be a mistake," I blurted, gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles whitened. I pictured the envelope, heavy with cash just 5 days ago, and my mind reeled through every possible error. Did I pick the wrong bank account? Did the teller misread the numbers? "I'll check right away," I promised, ending the call and fumbling for my coat. I practically sprinted to the bus stop, heart pounding so violently I thought passers-by might hear it. At the bank, I waited in line, desperate to see whether my transfer had gone through. When I reached the teller, I swallowed my pride and asked, voice low, "Could you check if a payment to General Children's Hospital was made under the name Zoe Ellison?" The teller's eyes flicked to the computer screen. She scrolled, then pinched her eyebrows together and shook her head. "No, sir. No transactions matching that description in the last week." My breath hitched. I thanked her, my voice hollow, and slid from the counter without another word. Outside, the sun felt colder through the glass panes. I pulled out my phone and dialed Harper, shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. It rang 3 times, then went to voicemail. 3 more calls, the same outcome. My chest tightened. Every second without an answer felt like sand slipping through an hourglass. When she finally picked up, her voice was calm, eerily calm. "Marcus? Is everything okay?" I swallowed to clear my throat. "Where's the money, Harper?" "The hospital says they haven't received anything." There was a pause, a stretched-out silence that sent a fresh wave of dread through me. "I gave it to my mom," she said softly, as if confessing a minor oversight. "She needed it for her holiday." I stopped listening to everything else except those words. My mind reeled. "Our daughter's surgery funds, gone." "Holiday?" I echoed, voice cracking. "You mean that cruise she always talks about?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Yes. She's never left the country, Marcus. It was a once-in-a-lifetime trip." I could feel my blood pounding in my ears. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every side job I'd taken on, the money from the envelope, had been handed over for a vacation. "Do you realize what you've done?" I managed, voice rising with desperation and rage. "Zoe's surgery is in 24 hours. Without that money, she doesn't go under the knife. She waits, and her tumor could spread." Harper's voice cracked. "Please don't panic," she begged. "Mom needed this. She's been so lonely since my dad passed away." I gripped my phone like a lifeline, feeling the plastic edges cut into my palm. "Lonely?" I shouted into the line. "Our daughter is in pain. She's 6 years old, having nightmares about her legs, and you gave away her chance to live pain-free." She went silent. I let her silence answer for itself. My legs trembled beneath me as I paced outside the bank, cars and pedestrians blurring past. I called back the hospital clerk. We're running into an issue, I said, swallowing back tears. Is there any way to hold the slot if I can deliver cash directly? She hesitated again, professionalism and sympathy warring in her voice. We can't guarantee anything, she admitted. But if you show up by 5 p.m. with a cashier's check or the funds in person, we'll try to accommodate. I thanked her and hung up, heart pounding like a drum in a war march. At home, I found Zoe playing with blocks on the living room floor, humming a cheerful tune that felt painfully out of place. She looked up when I entered, the faintest shadow of fear flickering across her face. Daddy, are we going to the park today? She asked. I wanted to scoop her into my arms and promise everything would be okay, but the weight of what Harper had done crushed the words in my throat. Instead, I forced a gentle smile. Not today, baby. I need to go help with something important. She nodded, eyes trusting. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. You're going to be just fine, I whispered, though I felt anything but. Before I left, I rifled through my coat for any loose cash I could scrape together. I gathered 15,000 naira in small bills, everything I had on me. It wasn't enough, but it was something. I placed the wads of notes in an envelope and wrote, "Hospital," across the front. I kissed Zoe's forehead and left the apartment, determination hardening in my chest. I refused to let Harper's betrayal condemn our daughter. If I had to beg, borrow, or steal, I would gather the rest. The afternoon sun felt heavy as I locked the door behind me. 24 hours remained until Zoe's surgery slot vanished forever, and I carried with me only the resolve to make good on the promise I'd made to her, that she would walk again, and nothing would stand in my way. That night, the apartment felt colder than it had any right to be. The single overhead bulb cast long shadows across the kitchen floor where I crouched, staring at the empty envelope that once held enough money to save our daughter's leg. My chest felt tight, as if iron bands had been wrapped around it. Harper's words echoed in my mind. Mom needed this, Marcus. The betrayal was a fresh wound, throbbing with every pulse. How could she have chosen her mother's comfort over our child's survival? I pressed my palms into my eyes, tasting bitter regret for every hopeful thought I'd allowed myself to believe these past days. When Harper came in, her footsteps were tentative, as though she wasn't sure she belonged here anymore. She stood at the doorway, shoulders hunched, eyes filled with a fragile defensiveness. She needed this, Marcus, she repeated, voice quivering but with an undercurrent of steel. My mother, she's been alone since my dad died. That cruise was her only chance to have fun. I looked at her as though seeing a stranger. The woman I loved seemed gone, replaced by someone whose priorities were impossible to understand. I closed my eyes for a moment, took a shuddering breath, and said, "You gave away 21,000 naira. 21,000 naira that was meant to buy my daughter's safety." Her face paled. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I stood, rising from the floor with effort, as though the betrayal itself pinned me down. "Wait," I asked, voice low but furious. "You expect me to wait?" My gaze drifted to the corner where Zoe's discarded princess crown lay on a small table, glittering innocently. "You chose a margarita over her future. A sightseeing tour over the pain she's carried every night while you turned your back." My words filled the room with a tense silence. Harper's lips quivered. She took a step forward, but I held up my hand. "I can't look at you right now," I said, voice thick. "I can't trust you." My own words shocked me with their clarity. I had always believed that love meant forgiveness, but how could I forgive this? She cast her eyes downward, tears spilling over. I felt a pang of regret that our partnership had fractured so catastrophically, but the anger burned too brightly to allow mercy. I wrapped the thin cardigan around my shoulders, as if bracing against the cold of her absence. I spoke again, more quietly. "I'm going to find a way to get Zoe the surgery, with or without your help. I'll sell everything I own. I'll borrow until my name is ruined. I'll beg on the street. But I will not let your mother's pleasure be worth our daughter's pain." Harper's silent tears spoke of guilt and sorrow deeper than I could imagine. For a fleeting moment, I saw the weight she carried, the pressure of caring for aging parents while trying to be a good wife and mother. But love, I thought, could not be measured by excuses. My path forward was clear. I could not remain in this home under the same roof with someone who had willfully endangered our child's future. I would sleep on the couch tonight, anywhere but next to her. The thought felt brutal, but necessary. As I gathered my thoughts, I heard a soft knock at the bedroom door. Zoe's small face peeked in, her eyes wide with concern. She clutched her beloved stuffed rabbit, its ears furry from countless hugs. "Daddy," she whispered, voice trembling as though she sensed the tension. My heart twisted. I knelt and pulled her gently into my arms. She whispered, "Mommy's not smiling anymore." I pressed my cheek to hers, breathing in the soft scent of her pajamas. "No, baby," I said, voice quivering. "Mommy's scared, but I'm right here." She clung to me, her arms tight around my neck. Her small shoulder bumped against my chest, and I felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly than ever. I looked into her trusting eyes and promised, "I'll protect you, sweetheart. I'll fix this." Zoe sniffled, peered up at me, then nodded and murmured, "I know you will, Daddy." In that moment, the brittle shards of my heart began to reform around a new resolve. We would move out, find a place of our own if we had to, because under my roof, she needed a safe haven, not reminders of betrayal. That night, I gathered my few possessions, my toolbox, some clothes, the half-finished cup of coffee that had gone cold, and made my way to the couch. Harper sat on the edge of the bed, tears silent and unashamed. I offered no comfort, and she did not reach for it. Instead, I settled under my thin blanket, pulled Zoe close as she drifted off in my arms, and stared at the ceiling. I felt the dull ache of broken trust, but beneath it, a fierce determination to rebuild our lives without her, to ensure Zoe's surgery went ahead, and to show our daughter that sometimes, even when the world fails you, one parent's love can be enough to light the path forward. In the days that followed, I became a machine of grim purpose. Grief and anger refined into a single-minded focus: secure the funds for Zoe's surgery, no matter the cost. I told no one but myself what I planned. I would not beg Harper for help again. I moved like a man possessed, rising each morning before dawn and not returning home until late, long after Zoe had fallen asleep. Each night, I collapsed onto our couch, my makeshift bed, exhausted in body and spirit, but holding fast to the promise I'd made to my daughter's small, trusting heart. My first act of desperation was to sell my tools. The toolbox I'd inherited from my father sat on the edge of the kitchen table as I emptied it, piece by piece, laying sockets and wrenches in neat rows. That old set had fixed countless leaks, squeaky doors, and broken appliances. It represented exactly half my identity, but identity was now a luxury. I posted an ad online, arranged a meeting at a petrol station, and sold the entire lot for a fraction of their value. As I counted the Naira notes in my grubby hands, I felt a pang of guilt and relief so fierce it was hard to breathe. This money would go directly to the hospital. No detours, no betrayals. Next, I sold my guitar. It was a battered acoustic, paddock wood darkened by time, the instrument through which I'd once chased dreams of open mic nights and carefree strumming. I'd forgotten how essential it was to my soul until I watched the cash exchange hands. In that moment, a piece of me died, but another piece, the piece that protected my daughter, grew stronger. I placed the money into an envelope that now bore only my handwriting. Hospital, final. I borrowed from every army buddy I'd ever served with. The calls were the hardest part, asking friends who had their own mortgages, their own families, to loan me thousands of Naira on high-interest terms. Each "yes, of course, mate" rattled in my head, echoing with the weight of their sacrifices and friendship. Some lent me 5,000, others 2, and one even covered the final payment, though he insisted I pay him back before payday. I promised him I would. To secure the rest, I applied for a high-interest personal loan under my own name. The bank officer, a young man with a neatly trimmed beard, raised his eyebrows as I signed the papers. "You understand the terms?" he asked. I stared at him for a moment, then looked at my daughter playing quietly in the corner of the bank lobby, her small face serene even amid chaos. I nodded. "I understand," I said, though I did not mention the tumor or the missing money. He handed me the check, and I tucked it into my blazer pocket. I didn't tell Harper about any of this. After everything, I could not bear her knowing she'd forced me into this position or seeing the lengths I'd gone to make good on what she'd destroyed. Every time she asked if I needed help, I shook my head, forcing out a weak smile. She said nothing more. Her silence was a sword that cut deeper than any accusation. By some miracle, in 5 grueling days, I assembled every last Naira required for the operation. The final tally, a crumpled stack of cash and a banker's check, rested in my coat pocket like a sacred relic. I'd sold almost everything I owned, borrowed from friends, and locked myself into debt that would haunt me for years. But I had delivered on my promise. Zoe would have her surgery. I had beaten the odds that Harper's selfish mistake had stacked against us. On the evening before surgery, I sat beside Zoe's bed, brushing each strand of her dark hair like I was weaving a protective spell. Her small face was serene, the early stages of pain medication already calming her body. Her eyes fluttered open when I leaned over to kiss her forehead. "Daddy," she whispered, voice sleepy but bright, "you did it." I swallowed hard, fighting tears. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, voice thick. "I did it. Tomorrow, you'll be in that big bed at the hospital, and afterward, you'll dance again." She nodded, the corners of her lips turning up in a tiny smile meant to reassure me more than herself. I watched her drift back to sleep, then rose and crept out of the room. In the living room, I gathered the envelopes, counting each one under the dim glow of a single lamp. The total matched the hospital's requirement exactly, no spare naira left for food or rent. I felt a twinge of panic, but swallowed it. We would find a way. I would sell more things, work more jobs, borrow more if I had to. But tonight, I would let myself feel relief. That night's sleep was restless. My dreams were crowded with hospital corridors and surgical lights, my own hands slick with blood that wasn't mine, Zoe's fearful eyes searching for reassurance. I woke at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, clutching at the blanket as though it were armor. I stared at the ceiling, heart hammering, and gave myself a silent pep talk. "You've done all you can. Tomorrow, everything changes." At dawn, I dressed in my best clothes, clean trousers, a button-down shirt, and reviewed the envelopes in my jacket pocket. Each piece of paper represented a sacrifice: the sold tools, the gifted loans, the guitar I would never play again. I paused before leaving, looking once more at the small frame of our apartment, every scratch and smudge a memory of simpler times. I pressed my palm against the doorframe, as if drawing strength from the place that had held both joy and betrayal. I whispered, "I'll come back for you, Zoe." In the taxi to the hospital, my stomach churned, but my resolve held firm. When the doors of the pediatric wing slid open, I felt a strange calm. I handed the envelopes and checked to the admissions clerk without a word of explanation. She processed everything quickly, handing me a printed confirmation: payment received. Surgery confirmed for 9 a.m. Relief washed over me like warm water. I folded the slip of paper and tucked it into my wallet as though it were a treasure map. Inside Zoe's room, she sat upright in her hospital bed, wrapped in a pastel blanket. She beamed when she saw me. "You made it," she said simply. I pulled a chair beside her, holding her small hand and smiling back. "I promised you, baby, and I always keep my promises." She squeezed my finger, and in her eyes I saw a glimmer of hope shining so brightly it banished every doubt. As the nurse came to prepare her for transport to the operating theater, I kissed each of her cheeks and whispered, "I'll be right outside. When you wake up, Daddy will be here." She nodded, braver than I'd ever seen her, and let the stranger in scrubs wheel her away. I watched until the corner of the curtain hid her from view, then leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. My body trembled with release, fear, relief, exhaustion, and love intermingled in a knot so tight it was almost painful. In that silent hallway, I realized something profound. Forgiveness would come eventually, perhaps for Harper or maybe even for myself. But not now. Not until Zoe was well. Tonight, I was just a father who would endure anything, sacrifice everything, and fight like hell so that his daughter could walk into tomorrow with strength renewed and pain behind her. And with that resolve nestled in my heart, I stood tall and waited for the final act of this ordeal to unfold. When Zoe opened her eyes after surgery, the first thing she saw was the soft blur of a fluorescent lamp overhead and the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator next to her bed. The four-line glimmered like a fragile spiderweb on her tiny arm, and her hospital gown smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. I sat beside her, every fiber of my being taut with relief and exhaustion. Her lashes fluttered, and she blinked slowly before focusing on me. I reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Hey, brave girl," I whispered. "You did it." She tried to smile, lips quivering, then exhaled a sigh so gentle it almost went unnoticed. I felt tears gather behind my eyes. This moment, seeing her awake, aware, alive, was worth every sleepless night, every aching bone, every sacrifice. The nurse stepped back as Zoe's eyelids settled. "Welcome back," she said quietly, checking the monitor readings. I watched the numbers flicker: stable heart rate, normal blood pressure. The tumor was out, the rod in place, and my daughter was healing. When the nurse left, I leaned close and whispered, "Daddy's right here." Zoe's small hand came to rest on my finger. I held it as if it were the only thing keeping me anchored to sanity. Her grip was weak but determined, and I marveled at her strength. She'd faced something no child should have to confront, and in that hospital bed, she was already a warrior. 3 days later, early in the afternoon, I was dozing in the uncomfortable visitor's chair when the door swung open. My heart leapt as the familiar scent of sunscreen and sea breeze filled the room. There she was, my mother-in-law, Genevieve, with skin bronzed by the sun and hair mussed from travel. She carried plastic souvenir bags bulging with trinkets, gaudy postcards, seashell keychains, and a plush dolphin nearly as big as Zoe herself. Her smile was wide and dazzling, as if she'd just stepped off a stage. "Surprise," she crowed, striding to the bed and lowering herself into a chair across from me. "I came back early just for my Zozo." I stood up, confusion and fury colliding in my chest. Zoe's eyes widened as she took in Grandma's 10 arms and colorful sundress. She sat up on one elbow. "Grandma," she whispered. Genevieve leaned forward and handed her the plush dolphin. "So you can remember Grandma's cruise," she said, lips curling into a triumphant grin. Zoe blinked twice, gaze flicking from the dolphin to the dorsal fin emblem on the stuffed toy. Then her voice came, soft and precise. "Did you go with the money for my surgery?" In that instant, the entire ward seemed to freeze. The beep of the heart monitor, the distant footsteps in the hallway, even Zoe's shallow breathing receded into silence. Genevieve's smile faltered, heat creeping into her cheeks. I felt as though the floor had dropped out beneath us. My jaw clenched, and I swallowed hard, my thumb brushing against the envelope I no longer carried. The betrayal was crystallized in that question. Zoe's clear eyes demanded truth, and I saw tears gather in her gaze. Genevieve's voice trembled. "I didn't know it was that money," she stammered, arms folding around the dolphin like a shield. "Your daughter's mother told me it was extra funds, leftover savings for a cruise fund." She glanced at Harper, who stood frozen in the doorway, face drained of color. Harper's eyes were wide, shame and guilt etching new lines into her features. Neither of them met Zoe's gaze. I gripped the edge of the bed rail, knuckles white, and forced myself to speak. My voice came low, calm but edged with steel. "You need to leave," I said, stepping forward so the distance between Zoe and her grandmother closed to a matter of feet. Zoe shrank back, clutching her dolphin, unsure whether to take refuge in my presence or hers. I looked at Genevieve, breathing deeply, as though steadying myself for what came next. "You took away the money that was meant to save her life," I said. That envelope wasn't a gift. It was her lifeline. Genevieve's shoulders sagged. She dropped her gaze and murmured, "Harper said it was extra. She said it wasn't needed right away." My gaze snapped to my wife. Harper stood so still she looked like an apparition, lips parted in a silent confession. Her eyes glistened with tears she hadn't let herself shed until now. My disappointment in her was a physical ache, radiating outward from my chest. I turned back to Genevieve. "That money was ours," I said quietly. "It was our only chance to give Zoe a future without pain." I extended my hand toward the door. "Please, leave now." She rose unsteadily, placing the souvenir bags on a nearby chair. The dolphin peeked over the top, its embroidered smile mocking the silence. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came. Harper hovered behind her mother, too ashamed to intervene or help. Zoe's small shoulders trembled as she watched the woman who had betrayed her walk away. The door clicked shut behind them, and I exhaled a soft, shuddering breath. I knelt beside Zoe's bed, lifting her hand to press it to my cheek. "It's over, baby," I whispered, voice thick with emotion. "They're gone." She nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she said, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I didn't mean to make Grandma sad." I wrapped my arms around her, careful not to disturb the line, and held her close. The nurse peeked in a moment later, checking the monitors. She offered me a sympathetic smile, as though she recognized the turmoil that had just unfolded. I managed a weary nod and returned my attention to Zoe. She leaned into me, burying her face against my chest. The rhythmic beeps of the monitors resumed their prominence, but now they sounded like a lullaby, a fragile melody of survival. Later that night, after the ward quieted and the overhead lights were dimmed, I sat beside Zoe with her plush dolphin in my lap. I studied its cheerful eyes, the shell pattern bow around its neck, and remembered how vibrant the world must have seemed on that cruise. But here, in this dim hospital room, we had our own journey, a journey of resilience, love, and hard-won victories. I placed the dolphin on the bedside table, next to her water cup and a stack of coloring books. Zoe's breathing deepened as she drifted back to sleep, clutching the dolphin like a talisman of reconciliation and hope. I sat there long after she fell asleep, reflecting on the betrayal and the aftermath. My heart ached for the mother and grandmother who had failed her, but I felt a fierce pride in my daughter's strength. She had asked the question that demanded truth, and no matter how painful, she deserved honesty. When I finally left the room, I reached down and kissed Zoe's forehead. "You asked the right question, Princess," I whispered, "and I'll always answer it honestly." As I stepped into the hallway, the silence felt charged with promise. We had weathered the storm, betrayal and all, and now nothing could keep us from the dawn of Zoe's new life. And in the stillness, I made a vow. No matter what lay ahead, I would always be her anchor, her protector, and the one she could trust above all. I said nothing at first. The anger and hurt wrapped around me so tightly that words felt hollow. Instead, I rose from my chair and walked the short distance to the foot of Zoe's bed, each step measured by the pounding in my chest. I stood there, hands clenched at my sides, eyes fixed on Genevieve's trembling form. She hovered by the doorway, souvenir bag still clutched in one hand, her face concealing the first taste of fear I had seen there. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the soft hiss of the oxygen pump filled the oppressive silence. Zoe lay between us, clutching her plush dolphin, confusion and exhaustion etched across her small face. Her wide eyes flicked between us, searching for reassurance as though she didn't yet grasp what had just occurred. Finally, I found my voice. It was low, calm, and carried the weight of every sleepless night and every naira wasted. "You need to leave," I said, stepping closer. My shoes squeaked softly against the polished floor. Genevieve's hand tightened around the bags as though she were trying to hold on to something, anything, to steady herself. I didn't know it was that money," she stammered, voice wavering as she finally met my eyes. "Your daughter's mother said it was extra. She told me it wouldn't be missed." She turned her gaze toward Harper, who stood rooted to the spot, pale and silent, unable or unwilling to intervene. Genevieve's voice cracked as she spoke the words that shattered what remained of civility. "I thought I was helping Harper treat Mom. Save it," I cut in, voice cold enough to slice through steel. I looked at my daughter, who blinked back tears, her small body trembling with vulnerability. "This isn't about vacations or treats," I said quietly, fury simmering beneath each syllable. "This is about your granddaughter's life and her ability to walk without pain. You took that choice away from her." Genevieve's shoulders slumped. The air seemed to drain from the room as she turned her head, gaze falling to the floor. She shuffled backward, the souvenirs dragging against the tiled floor with a soft scrape. Harper's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I saw her mother's face reflected in her own, ashamed and remorseful. Neither of them spoke. I waited until Genevieve reached the doorway, then added, "Neither of you belong here." My words were gentle but unyielding. She paused, hand on the door handle, as though waiting for permission to speak again or to stay. Then her eyes met Zoe's, and I saw a flicker of something almost like pity. Genevieve's lips trembled. "Zoe," she whispered, as though addressing a different child, the one she had failed. She bent down and laid a trembling hand on my daughter's blanket. Zoe flinched but did not pull away. I wondered if she recognized the sorrow in her grandmother's touch or simply felt the awkward weight of an unearned apology. "I'm sorry," Genevieve murmured, voice breaking. Then she straightened and turned, pulling Harper behind her. Neither looked back as they crossed the threshold. The door clicked shut, sealing off their betrayal with the finality of cold steel. For a moment, I stood rooted in place, staring at the closed door. The beeps of the monitor resumed their prominence. The oxygen pump hissed quietly as though nothing had happened. I exhaled a shuddering breath and wiped at my eyes. Then I knelt beside Zoe's bed, gathering her small form into my arms. Her face nuzzled against my chest, her tears soaking through my shirt. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "They're gone now." She sniffled, her body trembling. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered, voice muffled against my shoulder. "I didn't want Grandma to be sad." I stroked her hair slowly, each movement deliberate and soothing. "You did the right thing," I said firmly. You asked the question no one else had the courage to ask. You're brave, and you deserve honesty and respect. Zoe lifted her head and looked at me with tear-bright eyes. I just wanted them to love me, she murmured. My chest ached with empathy. They should love you, I said softly. But sometimes people make selfish choices that have terrible consequences. That doesn't mean you did anything wrong. I brushed her cheek with my thumb, gathering up her tears as though they were precious gems. We sat like that for a while, the two of us wrapped in a fragile cocoon of quiet and mutual understanding. Outside the door, the hospital corridor remained still. Inside, the only sound was the steady thump of our hearts beating in quiet solidarity. That night, I arranged her pillows just so and tucked her blanket securely around her small frame. She clutched her plush dolphin against her chest, eyes heavy with exhaustion. I kissed her forehead and whispered one final promise. I will always protect you, Zoe. You belong with people who put you first. Her eyes drifted closed as I turned down the lights. Before I left, I glanced toward the door once more, envisioning the world beyond, a place where deception and betrayal had no power over us. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, determined to transform our pain into the strength that would carry us forward. In the quiet hush of the hospital room, I felt the first flicker of peace settle over us, a promise that, no matter what came next, it would be just me and Zoe standing together against the world. Moving out felt surreal, as though the walls of our apartment had held both our happiest and worst moments, and now I was ripping them away. I packed our meager belongings. Zoe's favorite books, the plush dolphin still perched on her bed, my toolbox reduced to a single wrench, and carried them downstairs. The evening air was cool, scented with rain on pavement. In the taxi, I watched Zoe press her face to the window, eyes reflecting streetlights. She was silent, but in her quiet I heard everything. Sorrow for what was lost, hope for what lay ahead. We settled into a small rented room a few blocks from the hospital, its walls bare and its furnishings sparse. I assembled a bed for Zoe, arranging her pillows just as she liked them, and set her books on a low shelf. The room felt empty without Harper and her mother, but it also felt safe, ours alone. When I tucked her into bed, she touched my cheek. "Daddy," she whispered, "it's just you and me now, right?" I knelt beside her and clasped her hand. "Just us," I promised. The next morning, we walked to the hospital hand in hand. The lobby felt different this time, brighter, almost welcoming. The receptionist greeted us by name, and I realized how many faces had come to know us over these weeks. In the corridor outside Zoe's room, I paused, inhaling the antiseptic air mixed with flowers from the lobby vases. "Ready, princess?" I asked. She nodded, determination shining in her eyes. During her final rehabilitation session, I stayed close as she practiced walking with crutches. Each unsteady step was a victory, and I cheered with every inch she conquered. When she finally shuffled across the room without support, she threw her crutches aside and did a little spin, the hospital white tiles glowing under her feet. I laughed and lifted her into my arms. "You did it," I exclaimed, feeling tears of joy burn behind my eyes. That evening, back in our rented room, we celebrated quietly with takeout noodles and leftover birthday cake from the hospital cafeteria. Zoe's laughter filled the space, echoing off the bare walls like music. I caught my reflection in the window, dark circles under my eyes, clothes rumpled, but I smiled anyway. I realized that, despite everything we'd lost, we had gained something profound, each other, unbreakable. Before bedtime, Zoe climbed into my lap and asked, "Will Mommy ever come back?" My heart clenched, but I answered truthfully, "I don't know, baby. But no matter what, I'll always be here for you." She snuggled closer, eyelids heavy. I stroked her hair, memorizing the curve of her cheek. When she finally drifted off, I sat by her bed, watching her chest rise and fall. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy: rent, school fees, the debts I'd amassed, but I felt ready. In the quiet of the night, I whispered into the darkness, "We're enough. Just you and me." And for the first time in months, I believed it with all my heart.